I remember it so clearly. The card arrived on a freezing December evening, tucked among the usual stack of bills and advertisements. At first, I didn't think much of it. A glossy red envelope with a neat handwritten address. My name, my apartment number, nothing unusual. But what caught my attention was the lack of a return address. I flipped it over, expecting to see some company logo or even a stamp from a friend who had moved away. Nothing. Just smooth, untouched paper. Probably a holiday promotion, I muttered to myself, tossing it on the counter with the rest of the mail. But something about it kept pulling me back. It was too perfect. The handwriting, the crisp edges, even the faint smell of pine and cinnamon wafting from the envelope. It felt deliberate, like whoever sent it wanted me to notice it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I slid my finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was a card that looked like it belonged in a Christmas movie. Golden snowflakes scattered across a deep green background, with Merry Christmas embossed in elegant white script. I expected a generic message or maybe some cheesy holiday cheer, but the words inside were unsettlingly specific. Alex, this December will bring you moments of joy, unexpected opportunities, and a reunion you never saw coming. Merry Christmas. The penmanship matched the envelope, neat, precise, almost too clean. But the weird part? It was signed, simply a friend. I stared at the card, rereading the message, trying to place the handwriting. I didn't know anyone who wrote like this, or at least, no one who would call themselves a friend. A strange mix of unease and intrigue bubbled up inside me. Mom's always said I have a knack for overthinking, I said out loud, laughing nervously at myself. It's just a Christmas card. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. That night, I left the card on the counter and went about my usual routine. Microwaved leftovers for dinner, a couple of episodes of some sitcom I'd seen 100 times before, then off to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that card. Who sent it? How did they know my name? My address? And what did they mean by moments of joy and a reunion? I told myself it was just a prank, maybe a weird marketing gimmick. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It felt personal. Too personal. The next day, I woke up determined to forget about it. I had enough on my plate. Endless deadlines at work, rent coming due, and the holiday season breathing down my neck. I didn't have time to play detective, but the world had other plans. That morning, I got an email from my boss. Out of nowhere, she offered me a promotion. Nothing life-changing, just a small step up, but it came with a pay raise I desperately needed. First, I brushed it off as a coincidence. Then I remembered the card. Moments of joy, I whispered under my breath, the words sending a chill up my spine. No, it couldn't be. Could it? The rest of the week was a blur of wrapping up projects at work and half-hearted attempts at holiday shopping. But the card stayed on my mind. Every time something small but unexpectedly good happened. A barista giving me a free coffee because of a mix-up, finding a $20 bill in an old coat pocket. I couldn't help but wonder, was it all connected? By the time Friday rolled around, I was officially freaked out. I spent hours Googling phrases like weird Christmas cards and predictive messages. I even dug through old photos and yearbooks, trying to find someone who might call themselves a friend. Nothing. Then, on Saturday, it happened. I was walking through the park on my way to pick up a gift for my mom when I saw someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. My ex-best friend, Ethan. He was sitting on a bench, bundled up in a coat and scarf, staring at the frozen pond like he'd been waiting for someone. For a second, I froze. The words from the card flashed in my mind. A reunion you never saw coming. What were the odds? My heart pounded as I debated what to do. Should I talk to him? Pretend I didn't see him? I hadn't spoken to Ethan since our falling out years ago. Back then, we were inseparable, the kind of friends who knew everything about each other. But one stupid argument had torn us apart, and I'd convinced myself I'd never see him again. And yet, here he was. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I walked up to him. "Ethan?" He turned, and his face lit up with a mix of surprise and relief. "Alex, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Neither did I." That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the Christmas card. 2 predictions had already come true. The joy, the reunion. What else was in store? I didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified. But one thing was certain. Whoever sent this card knew me better than I knew myself. And they weren't finished yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that the Christmas card wasn't just a random act of holiday kindness. It felt calculated, like every word had been chosen for a reason. The next few days were oddly quiet, but that only made my unease grow. It wasn't just about the predictions that had already come true. It was about what might happen next. Then, on the morning of December 20th, another envelope appeared. It was exactly like the first, red, glossy, no return address. My stomach dropped as I held it. I told myself to just throw it away, but my hands had a mind of their own. Before I knew it, I was sitting at my kitchen table, tearing it open. This card wasn't like the first. Inside, instead of a warm holiday message, there was a folded piece of paper. It was stark white, and typed in plain black font were rules. Rules to keep you safe. Do not leave your apartment between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. If you hear knocking on your door during that time, do not answer it. If your phone rings, let it go to voicemail. Do not answer. If you receive another card, do not open it until sunrise. I read the list 3 times, expecting some kind of punchline. But it wasn't funny, it was unsettling. The phrasing was blunt and impersonal, like whoever wrote it didn't care about explaining anything. My first reaction was anger. Who did this person think they were? Sending me cryptic warnings like some kind of puppeteer. But beneath the anger was a deeper feeling I didn't want to admit. Fear. I held the paper up to the light, checking for a watermark or hidden message, but it was just plain, ordinary paper. There was nothing extraordinary about it, except for the fact that it had appeared in my mailbox without any explanation. For hours, I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore the rules completely, go out at midnight, answer every knock, tear open the next card just to spite whoever sent it. But another part of me, the part that couldn't forget how eerily accurate the first card had been, told me to take it seriously. And then something strange happened. That night, at exactly 11:45 p.m., I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock on my front door. It was a gentle sound, almost polite, but it cut through the silence of my apartment like a siren. My heart pounded as I stared at the door from the couch, frozen in place. Knock, knock. I thought about the rules. Do not answer. I don't know why I obeyed. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, I stayed put, gripping the edges of the couch cushion so hard my knuckles turned white. The knocking continued for 5 excruciating minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I waited for what felt like an eternity before finally creeping over to the peephole. I half expected to see nothing but an empty hallway, but there was someone there. A tall figure in a long coat, their face obscured by the shadow of the hallway light. They just stood there, not moving, not speaking. Felt like they knew I was watching. I backed away from the door, my pulse racing. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but when I reached for my phone, I hesitated. What if it rang? What if... I put the phone down and waited until 12:15 a.m. When the time came and went, I finally looked out again. The hallway was empty. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. The knock wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't random. Whoever sent me those rules knew what would happen, and that terrified me. I spent most of the day pacing around my apartment, trying to figure out what to do next. The rules didn't explain anything. No context, no reasoning, just cold instructions. And the most frustrating part? I had no idea who was behind any of this. The only clue came later that day when I noticed something new on the back of the paper. Failure to follow the rules may result in severe consequences. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. The words looked like they'd been burned into the page, the letters slightly raised like they'd been pressed in with heat. What did they mean by severe consequences? By the time the evening rolled around, my nerves were completely shot. I jumped at every sound, cars honking outside, the buzz of my fridge, even the creak of the floorboards under my feet. I felt trapped in my own home, a prisoner of whoever had decided to invade my life. Then, around 9 p.m., I got a text. It was from an unknown number. "Did you follow the rules last night?" My blood ran cold. I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at the screen, half expecting the sender to text again. But they didn't. I tried calling the number, but it didn't go through. Just a robotic voice telling me the number was no longer in service. That night, I didn't sleep. At 11:30 p.m., I turned off all the lights in my apartment and sat on the couch, clutching my phone like a lifeline. At 11:45 p.m., the knocking started again. This time it was louder, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. My chest tightened as I stared at the door, unable to move. The rules didn't say what would happen if I broke them, but the tone of that warning on the back of the paper left no room for doubt. Whatever it wasn't good. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited. When the knocking finally stopped, I felt tears prick my eyes. I wasn't sure if it was relief or fear or both, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to figure out who was behind this. The only problem? I had no idea where to start. The next few nights were a blur of fear and exhaustion. Each knock at my door at precisely 11:45 p.m. chipped away at my nerves. I followed the rules religiously. No leaving the apartment, no answering the door, no picking up my phone. But the unanswered questions kept piling up. Why me? Who was behind this? And most importantly, what would happen if I didn't follow the rules? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't stay passive anymore. I needed answers. It started on the evening of December 23rd. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with a mindless show, when my phone buzzed. I froze. Unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it. One of the rules was to let the calls go to voicemail. But this time, curiosity got the better of me. My hands trembled as I hit the voicemail icon and pressed play. The message was short, delivered in a monotone voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You broke the rules. Watch the hallway." I didn't understand what they meant at first. My apartment door was still locked, and the time was nowhere near 11:45 p.m. But something about the message felt like a command. Against my better judgment, I walked over to the peephole and squinted into the hallway. It was empty. I let out a shaky breath and stepped back, only to hear the faintest sound, like something dragging. I leaned against the door, pressing my ear to the wood, and the sound grew clearer. Slow, deliberate footsteps, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged. My stomach churned. I didn't open the door, but I stayed there, paralyzed, as the sound grew closer and closer. Finally, it stopped right outside my door. For a long time, I stood there, holding my breath. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. Whatever was out there felt wrong, like it wasn't something I was supposed to see. Then, slowly, the dragging sound started up again. This time, it moved away down the hall, I waited until it faded completely before stepping back. My whole body was shaking, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The rules weren't just suggestions. They were a warning. That night, sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the apartment made me jump, and my mind kept racing. Who or what was sending these messages? The next morning, Christmas Eve, I woke up to another red envelope sitting on my doorstep. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even heard anyone place it there. This time, I opened it immediately, my hands trembling. Inside was another set of rules, but these were even stranger than the first. Rules to follow on Christmas Eve. Do not step outside after sundown. If you hear laughter, stay completely silent. The lights may flicker, do not try to fix them. Stay still until they stop. There was a final line at the bottom, typed in bold. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences. By now, I didn't need convincing to follow the rules. I had no idea what those consequences might be, but I wasn't eager to find out. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I stayed inside, double-checking my locks and trying to convince myself I was safe. But as soon as the sun set, everything changed. At first, it was subtle. A strange hum in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then the lights began to flicker. I froze, my eyes darting around the apartment. I wanted to do something, turn off the breakers, grab a flashlight, anything, but the rules were clear. Don't move. The flickering started slowly, almost lazily, before speeding up. The apartment was plunged into darkness for half a second at a time, long enough to make me feel disoriented. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh. It was faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but it grew louder, closer, until it sounded like it was right outside my window. My heart raced as I pressed myself into the corner of the room, clutching a pillow like it would somehow protect me. The laughter wasn't normal. It wasn't joyful or even human. It was jagged, uneven, like whoever or whatever was making it didn't understand how to laugh. The sound sent chills down my spine, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But I didn't. I stayed silent, just like the rules said. The flickering finally stopped, plunging the room into a still, eerie quiet. I didn't move for what felt like hours, my breath shallow as I strained to hear anything else. When the silence stretched on, I finally let myself relax. Whatever it was gone. But then, just as I stood to check the window, my phone buzzed. Another message. You did well tonight. Tomorrow will be harder. The words made my blood run cold. Tomorrow meant Christmas Day. At that moment, I realized something horrifying. This wasn't going to end after Christmas. Whoever or whatever was orchestrating this wasn't playing a holiday prank. They were planning something bigger, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I had no idea what to do next, but one thing was clear. The only way out was to find the person or the thing behind all of this. And I had less than 24 hours to figure it out. Christmas morning arrived, but instead of feeling festive, I felt like I was counting down to something terrible. The message from the night before kept echoing in my mind. Tomorrow will be harder. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when or what. The day passed uneventfully, which only made things worse. The silence felt like the calm before a storm. I stayed in my apartment, pacing, checking my phone for messages, and glancing at the clock every few minutes. By the time the sun began to set, I was a wreck. That's when the final red envelope appeared. This time, it wasn't on my doorstep. It was inside my apartment, sitting on the coffee table like it had been there all along. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. I hadn't heard anyone come in. Hands shaking, I picked it up and tore it open. Inside was another list of rules, but these were different. They weren't warnings, they were demands. Rules for Christmas night. Do not look out the windows no matter what you hear. Do not answer the door, even if someone begs for help. If the power goes out, light the candle provided. Do not let it go out. At 12 a.m., you must open the door. Do not hesitate. The last rule sent chills down my spine. Every other rule had been about keeping the door shut. Why would they want me to open it now? I searched the envelope for a candle and found a small white one tucked inside, along with a single match. It was unsettlingly specific, as if they knew exactly what I'd need. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the air in the apartment grew heavy. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, deeper, like they were waiting for something. Then, at 11:45 p.m., the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, more forceful. I didn't move. I followed the rules. But then, something new happened. A voice, soft, pleading, came from the other side of the door. Alex, please help me. I froze. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't my mother or a friend, but there was something about the tone that felt personal. Alex, the voice repeated, louder this time. I need your help. Please. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it. The rules were clear. Don't answer the door. But the voice sounded so desperate, so human. I edged closer to the door, my hand hovering over the lock. Who are you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the knocking grew more frantic, more insistent. For a moment, I thought about opening the door, but then I remembered the message on the last card. Do not answer the door, even if someone begs for help. I backed away, shaking my head. I'm sorry, I whispered, unsure if whoever, or whatever, was out there could even hear me. The knocking stopped abruptly. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving away from the door. I barely had time to catch my breath before the lights in the apartment flickered and went out. The sudden darkness was suffocating. I fumbled for the candle, my fingers trembling as I struck the match. The tiny flame cast eerie, flickering shadows across the room, but it was better than nothing. I sat on the floor, clutching the candle like it was my lifeline, and waited. That's when I heard the sound. It started as a low hum, almost like a distant engine. Then it grew louder, turning into a rumbling that seemed to shake the walls. And then the laugh. It was the same unnatural laugh I'd heard the night before, but this time it wasn't outside. It was inside. The sound echoed through the apartment, bouncing off the walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My hands tightened around the candle, and for a brief moment, I considered running. But where would I go? The laugh stopped suddenly, replaced by something worse. Footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. I held my breath as the footsteps stopped just behind me. I didn't dare turn around, but I could feel it. The presence, the weight of someone or something, standing there. The flame of the candle flickered violently, threatening to go out. I cupped my hand around it, praying it would stay lit. The footsteps circled me slowly, deliberately. Then came the voice, low and guttural. Open the door. The rules flashed through my mind. At 12 a.m., you must open the door. Do not hesitate. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my body frozen in fear. The voice came again, sharper this time. Open the door. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed through the apartment, loud and final, like a countdown had ended. With shaking hands, I stood up and walked to the door. The air around me felt heavy, like walking through water. My heart pounded in my chest, and every step felt like it would be my last. I reached for the lock, my fingers trembling. Then I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness on the other side. For a moment, I thought it was over. Maybe I'd done what they wanted, and now it was finished. But then something reached out. A hand. Cold, bony, and impossibly strong. Grabbed my wrist and pulled me forward. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness as I was dragged out of the apartment. I don't remember much about what happened after I was pulled into the darkness. There were flashes of cold light, whispers that didn't belong to any language I'd ever heard, and a crushing weight, like the air itself was trying to smother me. When I woke up, I was lying on my living room floor. The candle had burned down to a puddle of wax, and my phone was buzzing with notifications. Missed calls, texts, the usual noise of the world moving on. But something was different. The apartment felt off. The air was too still, and the light coming through the curtains felt dull, like it didn't quite reach the corners of the room. I stood up slowly, my whole body aching, and glanced at the clock. It was 6 a.m. Christmas morning. I should have felt relief. Whatever had happened, it was over. But I didn't. The first thing I noticed was the door. It was still wide open, swinging slightly in the faint draft from the hallway. For a moment, I thought about closing it. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made my stomach turn. On the floor just outside was another red envelope. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This time, there was no card inside. Just a single piece of paper, folded neatly in half. On it, in the same precise handwriting, were just 5 words. "You did not follow everything." My chest tightened as I stared at the note. What did they mean? I had followed the rules. I hadn't answered the door. I hadn't looked out the windows. I'd opened the door at midnight just like they told me to. Unless my mind flashed back to the moment I hesitated. The split second I froze before unlocking the door. Had that been enough to break the rules? I crumpled the note in my hand and slammed the door shut, locking it with every bolt and chain I could find. But it didn't help. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. It was in every shadow, every reflection, every sound that didn't quite belong. I thought about calling someone, my mom, a friend, anyone, but what would I even say? That I'd spent Christmas being stalked by something I couldn't see or explain. No one would believe me, and deep down, I knew that calling for help wouldn't change anything. Days turned into weeks, and the world outside moved on. But for me, things were never the same. Every time I heard a knock at the door, I froze. Every flicker of the lights sent my heart racing. And then there were the cards. They didn't stop. Every few weeks, another red envelope would appear. Sometimes on my doorstep, sometimes in my mailbox. Once I found one tucked under my pillow. I never opened them, couldn't, but that didn't stop the messages. Each card brought a new wave of fear, a new set of warnings or reminders. They didn't explain anything. They didn't tell me who was behind them or why they'd chosen me. They only said one thing over and over in different ways. We're not done yet. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and got rid of everything that tied me to my old life. I even stopped celebrating Christmas. But it didn't matter. The cards found me anyway. Some nights I tell myself it's all in my head, that the fear, the paranoia, the things I think I see in the corner of my eye are just leftovers from a bad experience. But then I hear it. Knock, knock, the sound I'll never forget. And I know they're still watching. I used to love Christmas. Now I count the days until it's over. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.